If you can do a, if you, are you going to do an intro on? Yeah, you carry on with that one.
Hi everybody.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah. Thank you very much for turning up today on this looks like a beautiful day out today. So I'd just like to extend a very Truth Seekers North East welcome to Andrew Johnson here. So put your hands together for Andrew. I'm sure most of you have kind of read and got the gist of or not understand what's going on with the whole Madeleine McCann thing, because it is quite a circus, it really is. So Andrew's going to give his perspective on it, because you know, there's a lot of valid points which some people don't pick up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate that. Yeah, just before I get into the main presentation, I wanted to say just a couple of words, because we're coming up to the 18th anniversary of 9/11, which is a thing that I've done a lot of research into since about 2003. So I've got just about 6 DVDs of a film called Irrefutable, which Vimeo, the video sharing service, deleted from my account without warning on Thursday, saying it violates their terms. It's been there for 3 years, so make of that what you will. I've contested it, but it's free. I've got a free account, so even YouTube haven't taken it off. It's a film about the research of Dr. Judy Wood and how that's been covered up, which I've written 2 books about. And on the subject of books, I've got some books at the back, paperbacks, sort of £10 each really. But all my books are available from checktheevidence.com, free download PDF, so you don't have to buy the paperbacks if you've got an iPad or something to read them on. Because I'm in it to deliver information, I'm not in it to make a living. Because I actually, well, I'll get on to what I do shortly, but before I get into the main presentation, I will just say that this is really Richard D. Hall's research that I'm reporting on here. Now Richard, you know, a lot of people ask Richard to do presentations, and you know, ideally he would come and do it here, but he tends to just do his tours. He makes a living off doing the tours that he does every year. Everyone's familiar with his work. All the films, you probably can't see the URL, but madelinefilms.net. So basically all the stuff that I'm telling you today, except for maybe a couple of tiny bits, are all in these films, madelinefilms.net. You can watch them for free. You can get the DVDs if you like such things from Richard's website. There's various sort of combinations of them that he does. You can download them. They're on YouTube, I think. So we shall now move forward. I'm going to talk for maybe about an hour or something. It's probably 3 hours of material here. So we'll see how we go on. I might skip over some bits. But as I say, your best bet is to watch Richard's films. Shall I turn the lights down a bit? There we go, it's got plenty of light at the back.
Jeff, if it gets too cold, we'll shut the door.
Yeah. Just say if you want me to. I'm fine.
It's up to you.
Oh no, I'm fine, yeah. Thanks.
So just about myself, I'm from Yorkshire originally. I was born in Keighley, I grew up in Skipton, and I went to the grammar school there, which was founded in 1492. And then I went to Lancaster University, did a degree in computer science and physics, so I've got that sort of geeky mentality, really. And I went and did a bit of physics as well. Then I went to work in software engineering and development, initially at a place called GEC Electrical Projects in Rugby, which has long since disappeared. And then I eventually ended up working what was Plessy in Nottingham, which was a telecommunications company. That's now disappeared as well. And then eventually I got into teaching and education, and I currently work part-time for the Open University as a tutor. I do a lot of online tuition, and that's how I earn my living, from doing Open University work. And like just now, I'm going to be doing a load of marking, you know, end of module marking, because they have 2 lots of courses. Some finish with regular universities, and there's another block that finishes about now. So I'll be doing all that marking in a couple of weeks, and I get paid money for doing that as well. So that's how I earn my living. So I'm at home a lot, you know, and don't have to travel much. So, you know, I can look into all this stuff, talk to Richard, go and do interviews with Richard and stuff, and that's basically the size of it. That thing there is actually the last job I did, to do with the last job I did, which is Shiba Fuchi Works in Tokyo in Japan, where I went in 2009. We did some development work there. Okay, so that's a bit of background to me, so you know who I am. You can write to me at checktheevidence.com. Happy to talk about anything. I chat to people on Facebook fairly regularly, so no problem. So this presentation is based mostly, if not entirely, on Richard D. Hall's films. I've already said that, really. I've not really investigated the case independently, really, other than I actually read the Gonçalo Amaral book, The Truth of the Lie. This is the Portuguese detective who investigated the McCann case when it happened, and then he was fired from the police force in October. The abduction took place, the alleged abduction took place in April. Actually, May the 4th was the date they given, but that's probably not true. And he was working on it from the day it was reported until October, a matter of 6 months, and then it was history. So he ended up writing this book, which the McCanns have tried to get banned. They successfully banned it from sale in the UK for a number of years. But I think now it's on sale. I think it went on sale a couple of years ago. You can get a PDF of it online if you want. I'm also going to state some of my own opinions where appropriate, as Dave said. But firstly, we're going to hear from Jerry McCann if this works properly.
We had very clear objectives, what we wanted, and any parents would take the opportunity of trying to get information into the investigation. That there is no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there's no evidence to implicate us in her death. Everything we've done during the last 100 days is focused on the belief that Madeleine was alive when she was abducted.
That evening, did you give to your kids something like Copal to help them sleep?
We're not going to comment on anything, but there is absolutely no way we used any sedative drugs or anything like that.
How do you feel now that Amara's book is going to be on the shelves here?
Yeah, so, well, as we've already alluded to, anyone who wants to convince people that Madeleine is dead without evidence to support it, their motives have to be questioned.
Can you update people? Where are you now? Have you got the news? What's happening with your investigation?
I'd like to say to you that we did have some hot leads, but...
Cuando vosotros os enteráis de eso, de que la policía ha descubierto sangre en el apartamento, ¿cómo reaccionáis?
You know what? This is all investigation. All your questions are about investigation.
Jerry, we can't answer questions about
I asked about your reaction.
So that's just a bit of how he's reacted to certain questions when, on the occasions they've been on the media. So we're going to look at some of that a bit more as we go through the various bits and bobs that Richard's put together.
I would like to emphasise that I strongly believe in freedom of speech. I don't have a problem somebody purporting a theory, writing fiction, suggestions.
This is from Richard Hall. I agree with him. So Madeleine died on or near the 29th of April 2007. Madeleine McCann's corpse was concealed and then disposed of. A hoaxed abduction was then orchestrated on the 3rd of May 2007. UK security agencies assisted in the cover-up of the death, and the films explain all that further and why he's come to that conclusion. So I have no doubt that Madeleine is dead, and you'll see key evidence for that later on. And again, I've talked about films. Here's some of the artwork that Richard put together. There's these four, were the first four, and then he's got another one, and it's the most detailed documentary series ever produced about the case. You may have seen there's a Netflix thing that was put out about 6 months ago, so a very kind of weird thing. That's nothing like what you'll see in these films. So a synopsis of the films that Richard put together. Film 1 is called The Initial Storm. Film 2 has got some of the key evidence, and it's called Dogs Don't Lie, and we'll cover that in a bit. Film 3 is about private investigations. You'll see that the McCanns actually set up a whole raft of investigators supposedly investigating the case. Film 4, Government Agents, what was the government involvement? you'll learn about that. Film 5, The Phantoms, where they actually came up with a whole range of abductee stories and abduction stories, I should say. And that film is kind of like, Richard just pulls it all apart, and it's very meticulously done. And it's a bit dry to watch, that one, The Phantoms, but I'll summarise that in this presentation. And then film 6, taking that evidence from before, looks at when Madeleine actually died, and that's how he came to this date of, we'll see how Richard came to the date of the 29th of April 2007, rather than the 4th of May. And I think that's a pretty good deduction that he's made there, because the police didn't get that far, they weren't given a chance, the Portuguese police. We're going to look at this character called Robert Murat and his role. He's played a big part in the cover-up, and then we'll talk a little bit about why the cover-up towards the end of the presentation. We're going to probably mention this chap, Peter Hyatt. I've got a clip of him later on. Richard's used his research quite a lot in various elements of his presentations over the last few years. And there's been another update. Dawn reminded me when I came in that Richard did another update on this case about 2 months ago, I think it was, maybe 3, and you can watch that on his website as well, about the involvement of or the alleged involvement of the security services in the case. So the sources of information, again, you can go and check these for yourself if you don't fancy watching the films. Peter Mack has written this free ebook called What Really Happened to Madeleine McCann. He's another author that's written on this. You can also read Kate McCann's book if you want. That's obviously publicly available, and Richard draws on that quite a lot. But you've got to look at it with a very critical eye. But that's her own words. She's approved that publication, so you can take from that what you will. And that was made available in 2011. And this is one of the main sites as well, the McCann pjfiles.co.uk. That is actually the Portuguese judiciary. I forget the Portuguese for that, but PJ. They were made public and they were posted on the web some years ago, and that wouldn't happen in the UK, but it's allowed to happen under Portuguese law. So the Portuguese police, I don't know the exact details, but they just basically got fed up of all the interference, particularly from Leicestershire Police. They just thought, right, solid, we'll just put all the files online, and that's what they did. So you can go and look at those if you want for yourself and make of those files what you will. Let's see. So let's have a summary of the case. Maybe not everyone in the room knows the details, so let's. This has come, I think, from Gonçalo Amaral's book, his summary. So, it's from The Truth of the Lie. Madeleine Beth McCann, an English girl of nearly 4 years of age, allegedly, and that's important, disappeared during the night of May the 3rd to 4th, 2007 at the Ocean Club, one of the many tourist complexes in the village of Luz in Lagos, or Praia de Luz as you'll hear it called, Portugal. She was sleeping in a bedroom in the apartment block beside her sister and her brother, twins, aged 2 years. During this time, their parents were dining 100 metres away with a group of friends and holiday companions. After the missing girl was reported to the police, Gonçalo Amaral headed up the investigation. The case has received, obviously, global media attention. So that's basically what they said happened. What was I going to say there? It wasn't really anything momentous. But yes, there's a lot of connections to this place, Praia de Luz. Richard brings up some of them in the film, but there's other things too that, like I think Cliff Richard's got a place, or had a place there and stuff like that. So there's lots of weird stuff like that. So what you'll hear in the films a lot is the so-called Tapa 7. And I'm going to read out bits of this so that you get a picture of that. So along with the McCanns, there were these other people with them, the other 7 people, the so-called Tapa 7. The people who were key witnesses to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, that's who they are. The friends are to donate the libel payment to fund the Madeleine Fund, so they were libelled by some newspaper article, and they've put that into the fund apparently. The 7 friends who dined with Kate and Jerry McCann on the night of Madeleine's disappearance were central witnesses in their case. This is from the BBC website. Their evidence was pored over by the police and their backgrounds closely scrutinised by journalists and bloggers alike. None of the 7 were ever a formal suspect or arguido, and all cooperated willingly and voluntarily with the investigation. Bound by judicial secrecy laws while the case was still being investigated by Portuguese police, most made no public comment about what they saw. They now received $100 the libel payout. Their fellowship goes back a long way. 4 of the group, Matthew Oldfield, Russell O'Brien, David Payne and Fiona Payne, studied medicine together at Leicester University in the early 1990s, and the Paynes becoming a couple. So there's like, the McCanns were with a group of friends, and they were, let's say, witnesses to the events. So they were interrogated by the police, but not many of those stories actually came out in the UK press, but they are in the McCann files, if you want to go and read them. So this is a sort of breaking down the timeline of what we've already said on Gonçalo Amaral's report. At 5:30, Kate and Jerry McCann pick up the 3 children from the afternoon tea at the Ocean Club. At 6 o'clock, Jerry begins a game of tennis with other guests. David Payne checks on Kate and the children at Jerry's request and sees Madeleine. Jerry finishes playing tennis. Kate and Jerry McCann arrive at the Ocean Club Tapas restaurant. Jerry checks on his children and sees Madeleine alive and well. Having left the table to check on her own children, Jane Tanner sees a man carrying a child close to the McCann's apartment at 21:15. Matthew Oldfield at 21:30 checks on the McCann's apartment. Hearing no noise from the children's bedroom, he assumes all is well and leaves without seeing Madeleine. At 10 o'clock, Kate McCann checks on her children. Madeleine is gone. So that's the official timeline that McCann reported to the police and stuck to for most of the time during the investigation when it was still active. So people went searching for Madeleine, and there was apparently quite a commotion. So there was people soon after 10 o'clock. People were going in the street saying, "Where's Madeleine?" calling, knocking on doors, that sort of thing. And the Portuguese police, they began an investigation either the same evening or the next morning to get the exact. But they were British media said, "Oh, the Portuguese police were slow to react and all that stuff." No, they weren't. They started investigating it as soon as they got the report. British media began to report details of the case very early on, only a few hours after the abduction had been reported, which in itself is suspicious. TAPA's 7 members were all interviewed by Portuguese police. Leicestershire Police were asked to coordinate the UK police response, and the British diplomats and consul got involved in the case early on, which is not that unusual, but you'll see one thing that was unusual that came out from this lady called Sherry Dodd. She was appointed Special Foreign Office Ambassador for the McCanns on the next day. So they got special government appointment the next day. So that's unusual. Soon after this, a letter was leaked to the Belgian press. The letter was to the UK government and was from an unnamed senior British diplomat. So you can see that letter online, but the name has been blacked out. The letter expressed strong reservation about the diplomatic service being involved with the McCanns, noting inconsistencies in their statements and the fact that they weren't being very cooperative with the police. So it was probably Sherry Dodd, maybe she went to one of the police interviews or she had talked to the McCanns herself, I'm really not sure, but she basically thought, something doesn't smell right here. And I think she ended up she ended up leaving quite promptly. She might have even been sacked, I can't remember. I think that's in Richard's film. But the overall perception of the case is this, that the McCanns left their children without a babysitter. They are therefore, at the very least, irresponsible parents. That's what, the court they got criticism just for that. Many people may not realise or remember that the Portuguese police, after several weeks of investigation, they actually made the McCanns themselves suspects in the crime. They tried to keep that quiet in the British press, and there's been attempts at denying that, but it is true. The McCanns were made suspects, and that happened, I think, in October. And that was just before Amaral was taken off the case. Or just after. The McCanns had made numerous appearances on TV programmes around the world, the most recent being with the Fiona Bruce programme 10 years after the alleged disappearance. So I'm talking after the events now. It's been going on for years, it's still going on today, they're still talking about it. There was a recent request for more money for the investigation, whatever that means. People then, of course, say if the McCanns were guilty of any wrongdoing, why would they agree to be interviewed like this on these programmes? So you can ask that. But they actually asked for media attention, they set up the media attention in the first place. It is almost certainly the case that McCanns are or became part of a much bigger overall picture, as we'll start to see some of here. Okay, so as I said, the Portuguese police were on the scene very promptly. The story put out by the McCanns was that Kate went to check the apartment and the front door, which had apparently been locked, was open and the shutters of an apartment window had been jemmied open and Madeleine was missing. So they actually claimed that the apartment had been broken into, in simple terms. John Hill was manager of the Ocean Club. He said there was no sign of the shutters being jemmied, hence questions were raised about it being an abduction. So that Kate McCann had said that there'd been a break-in, but there was no evidence of a break-in. First red flag. Jerry McCann changed his story about leaving the building after checking. He said he went through the patio door, not the front door, and he left it unlocked. That was on the previous visit, because he said, the story goes that they were going every half an hour. Somebody was going from the restaurant to the apartment to check on the children every half an hour. That's the story that they stuck to. And so on the last visit before the alleged abduction, Jerry McCann said that one time he went through the patio door and one time he went through the front door and left it unlocked. So, again, dodgy stories. Kate McCann tells the story about the curtains in the bedroom blowing open when she went to look in the room at 10 p.m. Police photographs show this could not have been the case. She talked about the curtains blowing open when they went in and took photographs on the same evening or early the next morning, I can't remember the exact time. The bed was pushed against the wall and the curtains couldn't have blown out. And you'll see that picture in the McCann files online. Portuguese police strongly suspected the crime scene had either been tampered with or even arranged for them to see. So they were immediately suspicious. In Richard's first set of films, some of the inconsistencies between the accounts of the Tapas 7 are studied. So you go through all their statements which were given to Portuguese police, and he picks out the elements where there are contradictions, some of which again we'll mention in a few slides' time, or in the next slide. David Payne claims to have seen the McCann's children a few hours before the abduction when he visited the apartment. This is one of the Tapas 7. So again, they'd alternated this task, allegedly, going from the restaurant to check the children in the apartment, and Payne was one of them. And Kate McCann remembers his visit. RDH's film examines these statements in some detail because, again, David Payne's story and Kate McCann's story, it doesn't match up. There's big inconsistencies. So, if you look at the statements that these two witnesses gave, the time of Payne's visit was given differently in different accounts. David Payne says that the patio door was open, whereas Kate McCann says that the patio door was closed. David Payne says that he entered the room without knocking. Kate McCann says she heard knocking. This was before the disappearance, apparently, allegedly. David Payne said that I think Madeleine was dressed, but Kate McCann said that she had it in a towel. David Payne says that he entered the apartment, but Kate McCann says that he remained outside. David Payne says that he visited the apartment for 3 to 5 minutes. I think this is earlier in the evening, if I recall. This is before the disappearance, and Payne went to the apartment. And Kate McCann said he was there for about 30 seconds. David Payne says that this 6:30 visit to Kate McCann's apartment, or whatever it was, before they all went to the restaurant, said that all 3 children were there, but Kate McCann made no mention of the children being there. So again, you study the details on these accounts and not talking about the same event. The reason for Payne's visit to the McCann's apartment, with him being the last person to see Madeleine alive, apart from Kate, was given at various times, different reasons. One reason was just for a visit. Second reason was to bring the children down to the restaurant, or to the play area. To see if Kate was all right was another reason. To help look after the children was a fourth reason. Fifth reason was to see if Jerry could play tennis, and the other reason is just offered to go and visit. So again, this witness is not consistent. He's given a different story about what happened before the event of the alleged abduction. And this is another reason to suspect that the whole abduction scenario was completely made up. There was no abduction, because things happened days before, which you're going to see later on. Okay, on September the 7th, that's a funny day, that's today's date, so it's 12 years ago today, Kate McCann was re-interviewed by police and asked, what did you see, what did you do, where did you search, as in after Madeleine had disappeared, and what did you handle? And at that point she exercised her right to remain silent. She was asked 47 further questions and said no comment for each answer. If she wanted Madeleine found, why wouldn't she answer? Why wouldn't she answer? Surely she wants to give the police all the information so that they can find Madeleine, who is allegedly being abducted. After this interview, that's why the police made her a suspect, because she wouldn't answer simple questions. Those are pretty simple questions. Okay, so so this letter is quite important. Again, it's a lot small text, so I'll read it. It's not particularly long, but it's important, I think, that I read this out, because it mentions a chap called Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida, or Almeida. Again, I can't really speak Portuguese or Italian or Spanish for that matter, not very well. But he was basically Gonçalo Amaral's boss, so he was in charge of that police department. And he said that when he was reporting this to somebody else within the police, I think, the miner Madeleine McCann died in apartment 5A at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia de Luz on the night of 3rd May 2007. We're going to revisit that date later. B. A simulation, a staged hoax and an abduction took place. C. In order to render the child's death impossible before 10 p.m, a situation of checking of the McCann couple's children while they slept was concocted. So they made up this story of going from the restaurant to the apartment to check the children. Dr. Gerald McCann and Dr. Kate McCann are involved in the concealment of the corpse of their daughter, Madeleine McCann. At this moment, there seems to be no strong indications that the child's death was other than the result of a tragic accident, which again seems to be what happened. From what has been established up to now, everything indicates that the McCann couple, in self-defence, did not want to deliver up Madeleine's corpse immediately and voluntarily, and there is a strong possibility, therefore, that it was moved from the initial place where she died. This situation may raise questions concerning the circumstances in which the death of the child took place. There is strong evidence that the crime scene was altered and some furniture was moved around. Those changes are indications that the abduction was a stage-managed simulation. And that's from the head of the Portuguese police division. That's not from some conspiracy theorist website or, some McCann haters. That is from the police investigator who had that was the 10th of September. So he'd spent several months by then investigating the case. Okay? And that is never reported on the BBC. That should be reported on the BBC and ITV News. It isn't. We'll see what is reported later, and obviously probably most of you are familiar with the sorts of things that are being reported. So, going along with the Beatles song, 3 days after Madeleine was reported missing, Clarence Mitchell suddenly became the man McCann's spokesperson. So they had their own spokesperson. How many other missing children cases in foreign countries do you know where they get appointed a spokesman? He's the only one that I know of. At the time, he was head of Blair government's powerful media machine, the media monitoring unit inside the COI, or Central Office of Information, on a salary of £100,000 per annum. So he's not just some gopher, he's a senior guy in his organisation. So how could that be? How could they get the services of that guy? They're GPs, they're not just your average holiday makers, they are sort of well up in society, a little bit up in society. So, less than 3 weeks later, he was transferred to the Foreign Office, where he stayed until McCann's came home. So Mitchell went to work in the Foreign Office as part of the sort of messing about with the McCanns. Clarence Mitchell was appointed to head up the McCann campaign only 48 hours after the abduction was reported. Have you ever seen a government move so quickly? 3 days after Madeleine reported missing, Clarence Mitchell suddenly, on the day of Madeleine McCann's reported missing, ruled the roost at Tony Blair's expense 40 strong. So I've really told you all this. This is just a report. I haven't got a reference for this. But what he said was, the quote is important. This was in the papers, and he said, "My job was to control what comes out in the media. It's not to find Madeleine. My job," this is a direct quote from Mitchell, "my job was to control what comes out in the media." And he worked for the BBC on high-profile crime cases such as the Jill Dembo case, which Richard has also made a film about, and the Soham murders and Rosemary and Fred West. He acted as a full-time spokesperson for McCann's until 2008, so he was working with them full-time for over a year, or for about a year. It appears that it was mainly Mitchell who was responsible for a series of cover stories in the media, many centring around the disappearance and action of the supposed abductor. And in September 2008, Mitchell went to work for a company as a reputation manager at Freud International, owned by Matthew Freud, son-in-law of Rupert Murdoch. And we're going to meet another Freud later on, who you probably know familiar with. Yeah, so this is from a chap called Tony Bennett, who also did a lot of investigation into the McCann case. And he says, I was being interviewed at my home for a film in late 2008 about my book on the Madeleine McCann case by a northern-based film company. Because Tony Bennett wrote a book about the McCann case, which got banned, not surprisingly. The company owner said he had a great deal of knowledge about Clarence Mitchell, whom he described as the number 2 at MI5. Earlier this year, another journalist told me exactly the same thing. So it appears that Mitchell is embedded within MI5. And I actually mentioned Clarence Mitchell's name very briefly last time I came here in June, because he was the guy that was reporting on crop circles in the 1990s with the BBC. Which, the whole crop circle thing, not to digress too much, that has got heavy intelligence service involvement, as it was documented in another of Richard's films. So Clarence Mitchell's role was to control what came out in the papers, in all these papers, which have all, of course, featured these stories. So stories were planted in the mainstream media. Again, key dates within the sort of key dates within the timeline of the Madeleine McCann case. For example, on 21st of September 2007, an abductor in the apartment at the same time as Jerry. That was put out in the media. There's been no evidence that that's true. We're going to talk about this lady, Charlotte Pennington, later on. We'll mention her name. That story about Madeleine having high tea with Charlotte Pennington, that came out on the 25th. 18th of August, Mrs. Fenn heard a baby crying. Again, we'll touch on her story. And she actually was interviewed by, I think, a Portuguese programme or something. She said she never heard anything. She was actually, she worked in Praia de Luz and she was in the area, but she said she never spoke to the press about the McCann case at all. You know, but there was a story about her in one of the newspapers. 4th of May 2007, Jemmy Shutter's window, that was put out in the press. 9th September 2007, David paid to visit Kate, that was put in the press. So all these stories about an abductor and stuff, they were all put out in the press in this timeline to keep this abductor story going. I won't read out all of them, but some of these, Cat Baker, we're going to mention later on. This Metodo 3, we'll probably mention a little bit about that briefly. And there was a mention of Victoria Beckham lookalike that was seen somewhere, you know, near where she was allegedly abducted. And then you get all these stories coming out like this. Maddie Detective did lie about death, cover-up claim. You know, you had all these sorts of stories which don't get to any of the details you're going to see in here. And Richard goes into some of these stories in more depth in his films, more than I've got time to do here, and what might have motivated some of them. Yeah, so I think what I was trying to point out is that there's various subliminal messages coming in here with the stories that are put out, and then there's other stories that go with them. But I can't remember what the point that Richard makes. He's mentioned this in some of his presentations about, let's see. So you've got the truth there is a big heading. Radar will lead cops to Maddie. Is that the truth? You know, so does that mean that if that's the truth, that means Madeleine's been abducted because they're using radar to find where Madeleine is? You know, this is just a made-up story. So, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, who I'm sure you remember, had close connections to the case. Jerry McCann has mentioned that he called Brown several times. Gordon Brown contacted the Portuguese police asked them to release the Jane Tanner story, which we're going to talk about a bit later. The police were reluctant to do so and made a low-key announcement. So, in other words, Jane Tanner made up this story about seeing an abductor, and Gordon Brown asked the Portuguese police to put that out, so that again they could get this abduction story out. Brown's involvement as PM, when he was PM, increased. Times reported Brown's support of the McCanns. Kate McCann also reports in her book how she received a call from the former Prime Minister's wife, Sherry Blair. So why would Sherry Blair be calling Kate McCann? Important people near the McCanns soon after the announcement of the abduction story in the film. Richard talks of Bell Pottinger, who are a notorious PR agency that accept millions to give help, to help give certain African regimes, as in the Congo, a better image worldwide. So they will, say bring your business to Congo when it's actually, a very evil regime that's in the Congo. So they hire a PR agency to, make them look good. They are also agents for the McCann's holiday firm, Mark Warner. Bell Pottinger, that is. Alex Woolfall was a senior figure in Bell Pottinger, and he was dispatched to Praia de Luz and began to search the McCann's cameras. The last photo of Madeleine, allegedly taken on the 3rd of May in the afternoon, was not produced until 3 weeks later. And this Alex Woolfall, he was involved in actually getting hold of the McCann's cameras and getting hold of the pictures. Well, surely, and we're going to again mention that in a few slides, surely if you've got some pictures on your camera that you think will help find Madeleine, please take my camera. Here it is. Didn't do that. They didn't release any images to the police until at least 3 weeks afterwards. And then they also had help from Alex Woolford mentioned, top staff from Mark Warner in Portugal, John Hill, he was the one that couldn't see the shutters being jemmied. British Ambassador John Buck helped them. British Embassy Press Officer Andy Barrows helped them. British Consul for Lisbon, Liz Dow helped them. Local British Consul Bill Henderson plus colleague helped them. And trauma psychologist from the Centre of Crisis Psychology in Skipton, that's my hometown, funnily enough, Alan Pike helped them as well. So they got a lot of help. These people were all helping the McCanns during the days following the abduction report. Mark Warner was the holiday company, I mentioned that already. A group linked to the UK intelligence services, Control Risks Group, also got involved as early as May 2007. And Richard again shows you, where Control Risks are actually helping the intelligence services in these films. Now, a special helper, and Richard basically did a whole film on this guy, was Robert Murat. He was a key figure in the Madeleine story. He was and is a regular visitor to the area, as his mother has a property in Praia de Luz. When he heard that Madeleine was reported missing, he checked the garden of the house where his mother lived and the greenhouse. He started a conversation with a passerby, Stephen Carpenter, and he was then accompanied to the place of the disappearance and was introduced to the McCanns because he spoke the two languages. So he acted as a translator. He offered his services as a translator to the Portuguese police. With an employee of the complex and the police, he opened several apartments to look for the missing child. So he gets involved right at the, right in the start of it, going looking for Madeleine in the apartments. This stranger, but he's not really a stranger. Mm-hmm. Being bilingual, he offered to help out as a translator for the Portuguese police. I've got more on him later. So he's basically an infiltrator. He went into the Portuguese police investigation to keep tabs on it. That's what it turns out, you'll see. And then Clarence Mitchell arranged for the McCanns to meet the Pope on the 30th of May 2007 by speaking to Cormac Murphy O'Connor, the Archbishop of Westminster. A note about the Madeleine McCann disappearance was posted on the Vatican website, but was soon deleted when the McCanns were made suspects in the case. That's also what happened. You see pictures of Mitchell there, Jerry McCann, and Ratzinger, the only Pope ever to resign. So what about Leicester Police? Leicester Police became involved very early on in the case, considering the events were taking place in a foreign country. If the crime happens in a foreign country, it's that police's responsibility to investigate it. Superintendent Bob Small flew to Portugal with at least two other officers Soon after this, they were involved in setting up an identity parade, including Murat, Jane Tanner, who had reported seeing the possible abductor and was asked to identify from the parade who she thought was involved in the abduction. She identified Murat as a possible abductor, as did 4 other members of the Tapas 7 later, but then they changed their stories. And you'll see what we think the significance of that was later on. Matt Baggett, Chief of Leicester Police, made a statement to the Leveson Inquiry, which was this inquiry which happened into the way that this case was handled in the media and stuff. Due to the thirst for information from the media, every individual working in Leicestershire supporting the police investigation signed a confidentiality agreement. Messages were also disseminated to all staff to make them aware that even private conversations with friends could be reported on in the media. The confidentiality agreement was something that was put together by the Gold Group, who were running the inquiry as part of the UK effort, not by myself, the Chief Constable. So this Gold Group and the police, the Gold Group getting involved with Leicester Police and the investigation. Who's the Gold Group? Not police. According to Conchalo Amaral, UK police invaded and hindered their investigation. Why were they there? In a statement by Matt Baggett, Chief of Leicester Police, he said there was a need to coordinate media interaction. There was a need to coordinate media interaction, not to find Madeleine. Not to find Madeleine. So again, make of that what you will. So what was this Gold Group? One researcher submitted an FOIA to Leicestershire Police, to ask them for clarification about elements of Matt Baggett's statement about this Gold Group or Gold Strategy. The request was denied and the following response was given. Following receipt of your request, searches were conducted within Leicestershire Police to locate the information relevant to your request. In accordance with the Freedom of Information Act 2000, brackets the Act, this response represents a refusal notice under section 17, brackets 1 of the Act. Leicestershire Police can neither confirm nor deny that it holds the information you requested, as the duty in section 1 of the Act does not apply by virtue of the following exemptions: international relations, investigations, law enforcement, or personal information. So it's not Freedom of Information Act. Not in this case, it's not. So Leicestershire Police would not say why the Gold Group were involved or what they were doing or who they were. Okay, so that's a little bit about some of the dodgy dealings and sort of backroom sort of arrangements and stuff. So now let's have a look at some key evidence. I think it's probably the key evidence of the whole case. Cadaver dogs. A key part of the early investigation was the employment of cadaver dogs trained by expert Martin Grimes, and I've got a clip of that here. The graphic on the right here, I know you probably can't read it because it's quite small text and stuff. That again, it's available online. The graphic shows where the dogs alerted to human blood and cadaver odour in the apartment this is. They were brought in by the Portuguese police. So ironically, these cadaver dogs came from the UK. And they were brought in by Portuguese police, not by the UK police.
In early August 2007, he brought his 2 dogs to Portugal. One of them, Eddie, was trained to alert to the odour of human corpses, and the other, Keela, to blood. As we shall see in detail, Martin Grime told Portuguese police officers that Eddie had detected the scent of death in no fewer than 11 locations associated with the McCanns, while Keela also detected the scent of blood in 3 of those very same locations. The dogs were deployed on different days, so they alerted to these locations independently of each other. What I first noticed is that as soon as I came in, the dogs were very excited, and as a handler I could pick up his body language, etc. It would appear to me that as soon as he's come in the house, he's picked up a scent that he recognises. If there isn't a scent source in here, i.e. a physical article where the scent is emitting from, any scent residue will collect in a particular place due to the air movement of the flat, the apartment. And what I would say in this case is that there's enough scent in that area there for him to give me a bark indication. But the source may not be in that cupboard. The source may well be in this room somewhere else, but the air is actually pushing it into that corner. But it's a strong indication, and I would say it's positive for the things that he's trained to find. And he's decided, yes, that's what I'm looking for, and that's when he's given me the bark indication. What we should understand with this dog is that he only barks when he finds something. He won't bark at any other time. The only times I've ever known him bark since I got him as a small puppy was A, for his dinner, and that's just excitement, and that's one of the training methods we used to teach him to bark when we wanted him to, and when he actually finds something. He won't bark at other dogs, he won't bark at strangers, he won't bark when somebody knocks on the door or anything like that. So again, I would say that's a positive indication. Let there be no doubt about what Martin Grimes said his dogs were alerted to. He said, in effect, that his dogs were alerting to the past presence of a human corpse in those 11 locations. As we shall see in a moment, no other corpses had been present in those 11 locations. Therefore, if a corpse really had been in contact with those 11 locations, it could only have been that of Madeleine McCann. By July, 2 months into the investigations into Madeleine's disappearance, the team of detectives, led by Dr. Gonçalo Amaral, had clearly formed the view that the McCanns and their friends were not telling the truth and were hiding something. They and top British police actively worked on the theory that Madeleine had in fact died in the McCann's holiday apartment and that the McCanns, perhaps with the help of others, had hidden or disposed of her body.
So that's the key piece of evidence that says that Madeleine was dead. So in her book, Kate McCann describes how she was shown the cadaver dog video by the police. She played down this evidence and claimed that the dog's alerts were false and in response to the handler's signals. Jerry McCann also dismissed the significance of the sniffer dogs as unreliable. Kate McCann later gave various explanations for why dogs had alerted for blood and DNA. And she talked about them being sent on Cuddle Cat, which was Madeleine's toy. And she talked about Kate changing a nappy, I think, or the McCanns changing nappies, so the dogs were alerting to the smell from the nappies. And there was also talk of Kate McCann having handled, dead bodies at the hospital. That was put forward as an explanation because she was an anaesthetist. So the explanations for the alerts were that again, the knee had been grazed. Madeleine's knee had been grazed climbing the steps to the plane, so there was blood coming out of the knee. When they got to the apartment, and the dog was alerted to that. Another explanation was that she'd had a nosebleed. Third one, mosquitoes crashing into the wall, dirty nappies, as I said. Rotting meat was another one. I think, this is what I was trying to remember. Kate visiting 6 corpses in a fortnight as part of her job. Kate having Cuddle Cat in her handbag whilst certifying death. So, make of that what you will. Now, Jerry McCann, he talked about a US murder case with a chap called Zapata, where the husband was accused of murdering his wife. In the case against Zapata, the sniffer dog evidence was ruled to be inadmissible by the judge due to their alleged previous inaccurate results. So that judge dismissed the sniffer dog evidence in the Zapata case, and Jerry McCann made a big thing of that, either in a newspaper article or at some point anyway. What McCann did not mention, however, that after the judge made this statement, Zapata later confessed to the murder and admitted he had placed the body just where the dogs had alerted. So the dogs were right. Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about the funding for the Find Madeleine thing, which is the website is still there. I looked at it fairly recently when somebody sent me a bit of information about something related to it. Help Find Madeleine Fund. On the face of it, this seemed like a charity for helping the McCanns, and many people donated to this charity because they want to find Madeleine. In reality, it was and is a private company. with directors, and it does not have charitable status. It's a private company. The funds from this company have seemingly been used for two purposes: to finance legal defence action for the McCanns and to fund dubious or bogus private investigation groups to continue a bogus search for Madeleine. That's exactly what's happened, because one of Richard's funds is just about the investigations, and I think there are about 4 different ones that they set up, which lasted for a total of several years. So they had to be funded.
But I'm joined now by Madeleine's great uncle, Brian Kennedy, and he's going to tell us about the Fighting Fund. What's been the public's response to it, Brian?
Well, it's been very good so far, but a lot of people have said they're not quite sure how they can give money, so may I tell them?
Yes, very briefly.
Right, very briefly. You can go into any branch of the NatWest or the Royal Bank of Scotland and just say that you would like to make a contribution to the Madeleine Fund.
But tell me, Brian, about all the people that have been coming up to you today, just literally stuffing money in your hand.
Yes, they have. It's very touching, very touching. I would just say, this is not an appeal. The family haven't made an appeal. We've just set up a mechanism for people who said they wanted to do something and contribute. So the money can be used for all sorts of reasons, but probably mainly for legal expenditure.
That was an honest answer. The McCanns already knew or sensed that they would be needing top-line solicitors and barristers. And indeed, over the past 7 years, the McCanns have had legal help worth an estimated £4 million or more. Here's a list. They have spent 5 years trying to claim £1 million damages from Dr. Conchawa Amaral, the coordinator of the initial investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, and attempting to ban his book, The Truth About a Lie. They spent nearly £400,000 silencing retired solicitor Tony Bennett with a libel action after he wrote 2 books on the case. And they've spent a small fortune on legal advice from a series of top solicitors and barristers who have advised them in relation to their having formally been declared suspects in the disappearance of their own daughter and the risks of being extradited to Portugal to face charges. But very soon the message was changed. The fund was not to be used for legal expenses, apparently. Instead, it was to be used to find Madeleine, and they launched a major Look for Madeleine campaign. How much the McCanns have raised in the way of donations and other contributions to their fund is shrouded in mystery.
And Richard goes through some of the evidence about how much money that company has actually taken in. And that's still up there, the website's still there, and it was set up a few years ago now, and it involved this chap called Kevin Halligan. Halligan was apparently involved in a website setup to show a telephone hotline that was set up to receive reports about Madeleine and collect the information from these calls, this information that was collected from these call-ins about sightings of Madeleine and whatnot was never even sent to the McCanns or their investigation team, as it turns out. Halligan was later arrested and served 4 years in prison in the USA, and there's more details about this chap later. So in other words, it was a crook that set up this Find Madeleine website.
He was found dead as well.
Was it him or the other guy?
Yeah, no, him.
Right. Yeah, because there's another guy that died as well, Ray Ryan, wasn't there? Yeah.
There's a few.
Yeah. So again, if he was paid money to keep this cover, he maybe just threatened that he was going to blab and wanted them to pay him £1 million to keep his gob shut, and then maybe they killed him. I don't know. That's just speculation on my part. But he was involved with setting up this website, and he was a crook. Okay, so I think maybe I'll do a few more minutes, and then we'll have a break. So the old Dire Straits on private investigations. Of course, they had to do these, didn't they? Because the Portuguese police, the foreigners, they don't know how to do police work. Only the British know how to do police work. So you have to get the British in there investigating this case. So initially a Spanish detective agency called Metodo 3, the third method, was employed. Metodo 3 did not have a good reputation. They were paid £30,000 by the Catalan regional government to do a report on hazelnut farming. But this report seemed to have little or no relevance to anything at the time. What's that got to do with somebody being abducted? Nothing. Head of Metodo 3, Francisco Marco, made some completely bogus claims which were perhaps manufactured primarily for the British press to have something to repeat. So in other words, you set up this fake investigation, you get them to spout some vaguely interesting nonsense mentioning the name Madeleine McCann, and then the British press writes about it as if it's relevant to progress in the McCann case. That's how you keep the cover-up going. So this Francisco Marco, he was later arrested for illegally bugging a Spanish politician. Other detectives at the agency were also arrested in relation to other activities, but none were convicted. The detective agencies seemed to be a vehicle through which to funnel fake stories about sightings of Madeleine to the media and the McCanns. For example, there was this story which came through Metodo 3 about the Moroccan peasant girl photograph. I don't know if I might have that picture on another slide, or maybe I got a picture of that on the other slide. There was this picture that came out in the press with an old lady with a straw hat on, carrying a child on her back, and this child looked a bit like Madeleine. And you know, this story came out that she'd been found at this village community. You know, and it was all made up. It wasn't her. And then after Metodo 3, we had Alpha Investigations, another private detective agency. 13th of September 2009, so of course we're over 2 years on from the alleged abduction. Alpha Investigations Group was revealed as the new investigation team after the Metodo 3 debacle, when they were, you know, just exposed as just, you know, crooks basically. This was a pair called Dave Edgar and Arthur Cowley. Basically, they were two guys that were known to Cheshire businessman Brian Kennedy, who had fronted the operations of the Madeleine Fund. Now, there's two Brian Kennedys in this case. One is Brian Kennedy is Kate McCann's great uncle, and the other Brian Kennedy is a businessman. He's the one that actually knew these two guys, and they were supposedly probing leads that came into their office for Madeleine. So Brian Kennedy set them up with an office, you know, and a computer and a telephone line, and then the press lapped up the stories and bigged up the reputation of Dave Edgar when he was just some guy. You know, he wasn't an ex-policeman or anything like that, as far as I'm aware. And around this time, Clarence Mitchell generated a story about Manny being in the villages close to Praia de Luz. Alpha Investigations as a company only really ever existed in the pages of the news media. They didn't really have, they weren't really a real company. A check at Companies House, for example, revealed that a company called Alpha IG, not Alpha Investigations, was formed a few weeks after the stories in the press, and Arthur Cowley was the only director. And I checked this, and it's true. In the press, it had been reported that AI was owned by Dave Edgar, but it wasn't really. It was owned by Brian Kennedy. He gave him money. Alpha IG never traded, but a web domain for this company was registered by a man called Andrew Dickman, who was an associate of Brian Kennedy. So in other words, Brian Kennedy is involved in covering up what happened to Madeleine. Alpha Investigations again basically concocted possible abduction stories. The press wrote about them, and then Alpha Investigations did not investigate them, including, for example, that a British paedophile called Raymond Hewitt was involved in the case. He was staying in Portugal, 30 miles from Praia de Luz at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Hewlett said that he was not responsible, but knew a gypsy gang leader that had been involved in the abduction. So again, it's all rumours and hearsay. No real investigation. Oh, so this was the picture I was telling you about earlier on. So this is the, sure I had it on the slide. So this is meant to be Madeleine. Girl in Madeleine, the Morocco photo is peasant farmer's daughter. So it's just a made-up story, you know, because the girl happened to look a little bit like Madeleine. And the mail put gets it online. So again, there was ongoing headline generation. Madeleine is alive, we know where she is, closing in on kidnappers, Maddie home for Christmas, all this stuff. A series of false stories came out. One on December 2008 about Madeleine being thrown in a reservoir, which is at Reservoir de Bura, 15 miles from Praia de Luz, off a tower on the dam. Marcus Correa came up with this story, but eventually admitted it was a lie. He eventually admitted that he made it up weeks after the British press had reported it as a legit story. And again, there's a lot more detail on that in Richard's film. Okay, so I think we'll have a break there, so we've been running for nearly an hour now, and then we'll go on and look at the abduction, reconstruction, contradiction, and so forth. So thanks very much for listening to the first half.
Thank you, Andrew. So we'll
quick 20 minutes?
Yeah, 20 minutes,
30
whatever,
minutes,
yeah.
something like that. Andrew's also got books at the back for sale, which he'll sign. of course.
Sure, if you want
Yeah.
to sign it, yeah.
And there's also, we'll draw the raffle at half time as well. For new people who haven't been before, I've got these little lists of when our next discussion meetings are on. They're every fortnight on a Thursday from 7 o'clock to 8:30. And it's open discussion, so I mean you can talk about anything you want, 5G, 9/11, Madeleine McCann, John F. Kennedy, anything you want, anything that's relevant in the news today, fake news, whatever. So everybody's welcome to those meetings. It's a £2 donation and you get your tea, coffee, biscuits. We'll look after you. You're well fed. There's also raffle tickets for sale as well at the events. So we'll draw the raffle at half time.
Alright.
I'll stick the kettle on.
Alright.
When do you want to stick the kettle on and we'll do the... Does Dave do it? Yeah, turn the camera on. 2 seconds. Can I get this?
Supposed to say